Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. Well, this is admittedly a little later than I originally planned. Here's the bootleg breakdown / review of the Legend Creation Figuarts Great Saiyaman clone compared to the real one, which I just so happen to have here. In terms of the packaging, Legend Creation seems to do the same general thing on all of the bootlegs that I've seen so far, which currently this is the third one I know about, and that's namely removing all the official logos, so no Bandai, no Tamashii Nations, no even Figuarts on the packaging in terms of the brand name on there. They also changed the warning label on the back, and even at the very bottom, kind of around there, any mentioning of even the branding is completely stripped off. Even on the instruction booklet or manual here, you should be seeing a Figuarts mention on there, at least at some point, but it's completely stripped off. Otherwise accurate, though. Now we're going to get to the general unboxing of the figure here, and I noticed something very odd very early on when doing the boxing. For some reason, for the Legend Creation figures, they seem to enjoy really taping down the accessories within the packaging, but I didn't know why they had taped down the helmet in this case, although once I removed the tape, it became a little more obvious. Namely, the minute I did that, one of the antennas started falling out, and as it turns out, the antennas on the helmet head here are actually terribly sized for the job. They're actually slightly smaller than what they should be, so aside from a little bit of pressure and trying to keep the head as straight as possible, at least on mine, they keep falling on a very consistent basis, and you will probably see me having to fix that multiple times in the footage, at least assuming I haven't cut most of it out for this head. This head is actually quite terrible, I'd say. And in terms of the rest of the figure, I hate to bury the lead so early in the video, but there's a reason this one was just a little over 20 bucks. And namely, that's because for every good bit there's a definite problem that goes along with this particular figure. Namely, in this case, there's a lot of points where you can kind of tell there's some joints that just don't fit like they're supposed to, or don't move like they're supposed to. Like, in this case, the double jointed knees and elbows actually work great. Most of the ones that do work are just fine, but then we have stuff like the waist and the hips in this case, which, as you can see, I'm physically trying to hold them apart, and they won't budge, which means you can't really kick to the side or do any more in-depth posing with this Gohan. And a Saiyaman that can't pose is hardly a Saiyaman at all. Sad to say in this case. Speaking of things that can't move, of course, you have, well, the knee joints are actually really good on this thing. The toe joints, like I swear, like on almost every bootleg I have, the toe joints are stuck on this thing. But it's a little more obvious that they have paint rub or overfilled with paint for that one. And speaking of joints that don't quite work like they're supposed to, we can see now I'm fussing around with the cape. I'm trying to get it on there. The rubbery part of the cape is fine enough, it'll fit into the place, but the actual quality of the plastic end, the full cape itself, is honestly terrible. And while it might not catch fully on camera there, the joint, even right out of the box, is completely scratched up and in poor shape, which is actually surprising. Why would they include something that beat up? It's like either a cheap recreation or a factory second, a reject of some sort, because it really doesn't do the job here, and in fact, it's an incredible pain to get this bootleg cape to fit on the figure on there. I actually had to struggle with this more so off camera. We're going to do that, and you'll get that because it just wouldn't stay there, and it consistently kind of falls off in my case. Moving on, where we kind of had a look at the neck peg on there. It's not great quality. In fact, it's kind of shoddily casted, but it does the job well enough, so you can get all the other heads. We're going to look at the normal head on here first. And it's not a terrible fit by any means. You can kind of tell that the eye decals are a little off in their placement. And when we do a little bit of a side-by-side with the hair, yeah, there's definitely some casting issues on this particular bit. But it's functional, I would say. And now we're going to take a look at the Super Saiyan head, which is, admittedly, it's probably the best head I have on this particular bootleg on this. The eyes are a little low, if anything, but once you're able to get the head on there, it's clearly the best head of the bunch on there, because the helmet one, as I mentioned earlier, is total rubbish. Yeah, that actually looks pretty okay. Hair needs a little cleanup in terms of some sharpness and detailing, but it's okay, it's functional. Now, unfortunately for the breakdown part of it, here's the immediate explanation of why I cannot recommend this figure as a good replacement for the real deal Saiyaman. And that's because of the ab crunch and the hips being incredibly poor remakes of what the real deal has. For the ab crunch, as you kind of notice there, is just one big solid piece of rubbery plastic on there, which means you don't really have the full articulation range. And in terms of articulation, the hips have it much worse. What you're seeing there is not 2.0 action-bodied hips. In fact, it's not even 1.0 hips. It's some kind of weird aberration that, while it has decent vertical movement, so you basically can kick up and down just fine, it has almost no horizontal movement because of the lack of opening on the hips, which means basically your figure here can't do the splits properly, which means it can't do side kicks properly, and much less cannot do any of the real poses which the Great Saiyaman is generally known for. And that's actually incredibly disappointing on this one, because a lot of the other joints on this particular figure tend to hold out pretty well for the most part, but without the hips on there, this is just a very poor recreation of it. It's like you're literally seeing me have the forcer thing to try to hold the place, and the figure wants to automatically go back to its default standing pose. And you're not buying a Saiyaman just to have a default stand by any means, which means, unfortunately, that part of it's no good. Now, we're going to take a look at some of the smaller accessories, or at least the heads, to do a comparison. And the first thing we're looking at is actually the antennae. The part with the green bit on there is, of course, the real one, and I'm going to try to keep the real stuff on the left here. And on the right, it's an incredibly poorly casted version of it, which, much like the ones that are in the helmet, will be a bit of a loose fit inside the bootleg helmet too. Speaking of which, you can even tell there's a much different paint finish on the real one on the left there compared to the right here. And another thing which is going to be kind of a repetition, not on just the heads here, but throughout the figure, there is a much softer level of detail on the bootlegs as a whole. Which is because, as I might imagine, everything is recasted and doesn't fit properly as a result on there. Like the antennas that just fell out yet again. Anywho, moving on to the heads here. Actually, the bootleg head for the normal Gohan seems a little smaller, at least the face seems smaller because of where the decal there. And the hair treatment is definitely a lot softer. You can definitely see the edges or in the lines are a lot more dug in on the real version as opposed to the bootleg here, and it's quite noticeable in this case. The eye decals on the bootleg aren't particularly bad, they're just misplaced, so that's something that could be fixed on there. Now, for the Super Saiyan heads here, okay, the facial features on the bootleg, it's a difference of night and day. That definitely needs a new set of decals on there, and the hair is rough. When you officially compare the real one to the fake one, the detailing, or the loss of detail, I should say, on the bootleg is fairly evident. It's a no contest. And that's similarly said for the unmasked, or at least the bandana version of the head here, which everything is much softer on the bootleg one, and that becomes particularly prevalent on the sunglasses, which have kind of a noticeable bevel on the real one, and on the fake one, it's pretty much gone. It's actually quite sad. However, what's worth noting on here is, in case for some reason you need to replace some lost heads on the real figure, the bootleg heads do actually fit on there just fine. Which I guess means that in case you want to do some modification for some of the bootleg heads in order to put a real one, while some of them might be slightly looser, they do work just as well, and vice versa. Although I wouldn't know why you want to use a real one, a real head, on a bootleg body. But hey, to each their own, I suppose. At least that means you have some options. Maybe you can use some accessories from the bootleg in order to add to the real one. As for my last thoughts on whether I'd recommend this bootleg once again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, hard pass. There's just too many issues in terms of the quality of this bootleg, and the whole ab crunch and hips issue are a complete deal breaker on this one. In fact, the only reason that this is even worth partially considering, and that's if you find it for cheaper than I did, is he needs very specific replacement parts or joints for the real deal. Because that's literally all this thing is good for. Thanks for watching. Catch you all later.